So finally I have been able to go back to Finca el Suelo, our coffee farm in Colombia, where we are trying to produce coffee with organic practices or biological practices. That means we're only using microorganisms, compost, and food for those organisms to kind of raise the trees. So it's all about kind of giving life back to soil so they can feed the coffee trees that are planted in the soil. So that's why the name Finca el Suelo. I haven't been here since 2020, February 2020, and a lot of stuff has happened since then. We have actually not worked a lot on the farm since then because I haven't been here. And Elias, who is my next door neighbor, who I also buy coffee from, he has basically just helped me to clean weeds around the trees, and we haven't really put on any compost or fish hydrolysate or kelp or anything to help the trees grow. So I've been here now for almost 3 weeks and to do a little bit of work, and I just wanted to give you a little update on what we have been doing on the farm and also to show you some photos on how the farm is progressing. So behind me here you can see our variety garden. We call it the museum, where we have, I think now maybe 15 different cultivars, quite rare ones, and some of them are doing quite well, some are not. But these are actually fertilized with mineral fertilizer, and we do that just to make sure that they survive, so that we can see if they have unique flavors. We might plant more of them in the farm and grow them organically. So it's kind of just to make sure that they grow up, and so that we can taste the different cultivars and see if we have any good quality trees in the museum. As you can see, some of these have grown quite tall and are already producing cherries. And some of them are very short, a little bit yellow. They have flowers, some of them, but they're not producing yet. And the oldest ones are kind of down at the end here. They're Comun, cultivar that we found on Finca Tamana, and we took some seeds and planted them, and they're tasting really good actually. Big, bold, round beans and lots of fruit flavor. Kind of tastes like Bourbon, but I don't think it's a Bourbon cultivar. So hopefully in the future we'll find something exciting here. We might have a different species here as well. Very secret stuff. So this is actually Finca el Suelo. It's a big hill and some of it is planted with coffee, some are not. We did plant the whole hill you can see here with over 4,000 trees, and at the moment there is only 139 of them left. But then we planted this new area where you can see the wood chips. We planted that last February, so in 2020. Most of those trees have survived. They're quite small yet, but still some of them have flowers. Some of them are doing quite well, some are not doing so well. But we will just replant those. So one of the things that I've done during this week is to bring 250 bags of wood chips out in this field and putting them around the trees. We kind of cleaned weeds around the trees, and then we put the mulch around wood chips in order to keep moisture and build organic material. And we've done this for a couple of years now, and it seems to work really well. After a year, most of the wood chip is broken down and becomes really nice organic soil. Now to the right here we have around 110 trees that were planted in 2019 in February. It's an Ethiopian variety that I got some seeds from my friend Gilberto, who unfortunately passed away. But these trees are doing really well, and we planted these with a new technique. Where we dug really big holes and put a lot of organic material in, some manure, wood chips, weeds, topsoil, compost, and then we planted the trees 2 months later in that hole, and they have grown really well and they are producing. So this is the coffee that we will be harvesting this month or next month, and we'll be seeing in our in our social media, at least. It's not a lot of coffee, but a little bit, and some of you might be able to taste very soon. As you can see, these are my Ethiopian cultivars, and I planted them in 2019 March in the field here, and some of the branches are just carrying a lot of green cherries. I guess they will be ripe in a few months, and that's because we have a small harvest now at the end of the year called the mitaka. But the main harvest is normally April throughout August. So hopefully we already harvested a little bit of this, so maybe in total 4 or 5 kilos in green coffee. and hopefully next year these will produce a little bit more. We have 110 trees, as I said, and yeah, hopefully we can get a little bit more than 10-20 kilos out of these trees, maybe a bag or something, and hopefully we'll be able to sell it. The coffee is actually tasting pretty nice. It has some of those kind of floral and citric characters that you find in Ethiopian coffees, but it's a little bit different, I would say. So hopefully it will improve a little bit with the years, because normally the first pickings are not the best. We'll see. So as you can see, there's a lot of cherries on some of these Ethiopian trees, and some of them are carrying a little bit more than others, and some of them are a little bit bigger than others because we had to replant some of them, because when we planted the first time, some of them died. But some of the trees look a little bit different, and that's strange because they came from only a few trees in Hilberto's variety garden, but they do look a little bit different, and I have to say the cherries taste amazing. So what I've been doing here is mainly just cleaning weeds around the trees, making the surface where the tree is a little bit flatter so it's not so hilly. And then we have applied fish hydrolysate and kelp, because I didn't have any compost tea or extract at the moment. So when I get back next year, I will have some compost ready so we can apply that. I've also planted shade, of course, and these are one of my shade trees. In the early days of the farm, we planted a lot of shade trees, but most of them have not survived. And I think it's because they were not able to develop their roots properly. Because beneath us is a very thin layer of topsoil, and then there's just compacted, collapsed clay. And the roots aren't able to really penetrate that. So what we have done here is to dig the huge holes that we did for the coffee trees. It's like 60 centimeters deep, 60 centimeters wide, and 1 meter long. So quite huge holes. And we put a lot of compost, organic material, topsoil, wood chips in the hole, let it kind of compost for a while, and then a couple of months later we planted the trees. And these shade trees that we did that with are growing much quicker and are much bigger now. So you can barely see any shade trees that we planted in 2015 on the other parts of the farm, and this is just 2 years old and it's much bigger and more kind of green and everything. So the idea is to kind of have more shade trees. I'm going to plant a lot more, and on parts of the farm I'm just going to let the forest grow, because we want to keep more biodiversity on the farm. And possibly in the future you could plant a little bit of coffee inside the forest, but I want to kind of get the native forest back on the farm, because the soil here is so degraded, because it's been open landscape, been grazed by cows, and it's compacted, dry. There's very little organic material, so that's kind of the task we have to do on the farm. I'm sitting next to a tree that we planted in February 2020, and this is growing quite well, I would say. It already has some cherries on, but we have around 330 of these trees planted, and we also dug quite deep holes for these, not a meter wide, but we had like 60 times 60 times 60 centimeters. And then we also composted and stuff in the holes before we planted the trees. Well, these aren't doing as good as the other ones where we dug a little bit bigger holes. So I think we will stick to the much bigger holes in the future. But as you can see, some of these trees are doing really well, others are not. And I'll show you a little bit around this new area so you can see. But we're expecting the first picking and just a few cherries on some of those trees. But we will be able to taste this coffee maybe next year in August, I think, because that's when those cherries will be ripe. So looking forward to that. As you can see, there are some different sizes of these trees. This one already has cherries on them, but it's clearly lacking a little bit of nutrients, and that's because they haven't received any compost or love since February 2020. And behind me here is one of our shade trees that I also planted in February 2020. They're growing quite fast, and we actually planted shade trees in every third row on this part of the farm. And so we planted a lot of them, and hopefully they will grow up fast so they can give shade to the coffee trees, because I think that's vital in order to get the highest quality. and also to prevent the soil from getting too dry, and to also produce organic material for the soil. So I'm sitting next to a typical tree that we planted in 2015. We planted around 2,500 of these. We probably have less than 30 left. And as you can see, they're not doing great. They're planted in a hill. We only made like really small holes like they do by tradition here with like a screwdriver machine. And then we just planted them, and we have applied a lot of compost extracts and so on, but these trees are not surviving. So I have decided to give up on them. There's so few left and they're scattered around the farm. So I'm just gonna leave them, not do anything about them. And this whole area, which you can see, it's just grass basically. We will just let grow and maybe plant some native shade trees and help those grow. We want to kind of bring back the forest on this part of the land because the topsoil here is very thin. There's not a lot of, it's like rock hard to walk on, so it's not very nice to plant anything here at the moment. So we just need to let things grow and let nature do its job so that the soil can kind of get back to life, and then maybe in the future we will be able to plant something here. Now behind me is a great example of how this new planting technique that I learned in Kenya works. This is a geisha tree that we planted 2 years ago, and it's growing quite well. It already has flower buds on it. It's very green. And this is where we didn't dig like a huge hole, but we dug a much larger hole than we did with all the rest of our geishas. And we put compost, wood chips and everything in. So this has been growing quite well. And right next to it, you can barely see it, but let's see. There used to be a lot of trees here, but let's go. This is this here is another geisha tree that we planted in 2015. So it's much older than the one we just saw, but it's not green at all. It's barely growing. And this is because we just made a small hole with this kind of traditional machine that they use to make holes for the trees, and we planted them. And I have applied a lot of compost, wood chips, compost extract, compost tea, you name it, but they're still not able to grow, whereas the tree behind me here has barely received anything. I gave it some compost when I planted it, and I've given it a few rounds of compost extract, but it's growing like crazy. And these are the same seeds, so this is very visual how making a good fundament for the tree to grow is vital if you want to grow organic coffee, I think. So as you can see here, there are a few coffee trees around. These are all geisha trees, but they were planted in between 2015 and 2018. Most of them are growing really bad, slow, because we didn't take good care of the soil before we planted them. There are a few in between here where we dug bigger holes, and some of them are growing quite fast and are green, but most of these aren't doing so well. And you can see the plantain here is growing quite well. We've also planted pigeon pea, which is a leguminous plant. We just cut them down and they will regrow. But so this area is actually doing quite well. We've seen platano and plantain planted elsewhere on the farm where they're not growing at all. So the idea with these geisha trees, I think initially we have planted around 3,000 of them, but we only have 139 left, I counted this week. And the idea is to now take berries or seeds from the best trees here, like the one behind me, and we are going to dig big holes. Maybe we'll do 50 to 100 trees at a time and replant this whole area. And the goal is to maybe end up with 1,000, 1,500 geisha trees. We have been able to taste this coffee, and it tastes really, really good. It has for sure these kind of floral flavors and stone fruit flavors, but it also has these kind of red fruit flavors in addition. So it's a very interesting geisha for sure, and I hope I will be able to grow a little bit more of it in the future. So as you can see, there is some progress on the farm. Finally we are producing some coffee, and I hope in the next 1 or 2 years the area behind me here, which is full of wood chips, will be producing as well. So maybe in a year or two we can be able to sell a little bit of coffee. We will maybe try to sell the small amounts we have at the moment, We only have, I think 3 or 4 kilos. We'll have to check when I get home, because I just received some new harvests here. So I'll bring that back home, cup it, and then see if it's good enough for selling. But thank you for joining me at Finca el Suelo. I hope you will be following the project also in the future, and I hope I will learn a lot more so that we can try to help other producers do the same thing, meaning growing fully organic coffee in a biological way, where they regenerate the soil, make it much more healthy, make the trees more healthy, make the quality of the coffee higher, and where you don't have to depend on expensive mineral fertilizers, pesticides, and so on. I'll have to prove it first, but that's the goal, and hopefully I will be able to achieve that goal in the near future. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.